Xander de Rijke.
My advice to you is seek professional help.
Hallo iedereen en welkom terug bij Ben je nog aan het kijken? De podcast waar ik, uw host Xander de Rijke, iedere week praat met gasten over een favoriete televisieprogramma. Na het succes van vorig seizoen en de fijne reacties op de interviews met de buitenlandse gasten, heb ik dit seizoen de mogelijkheden op oneindig gezet, dus in plaats van een special op het einde van het seizoen, zit ze nu een beetje versnipperd doorheen de gewone afleveringen. Ik ben belachelijk fier op wie en wat er de komende weken allemaal geprogrammeerd staat en ik hoop dat jullie even hard zullen genieten van de gesprekken als mij. Dat gezegd zijnde laten we de spits afbijten met een talent van formaat.
Ben je nog aan het kijken?
Mijn speciale gast vandaag is een Amerikaanse comedian, actrice, schrijfster en podcaster. Je kent haar misschien van Drunk History, Chelsea Lately of haar Netflix specials Just Keep Living en I'm Gonna Die Alone. Ze heeft ook 2 bestsellers geschreven, I Can Barely Take Care of Myself, Tales from a Happy Life Without Kids en I Know What I'm Doing and Other Lies I Tell Myself, Dispatches from a Life Under Construction. Momenteel is ze bezig achter de schermen van de Amazon Prime-reeks The Marvelous Mrs Maisel en haar podcast No Fun, die je kan steunen via Patreon. Ik heb haar heel kort ontmoet eind 2019 in Amsterdam. Blij dat ik een tweede kans heb en minder nerveus ben deze keer. Jen Kirkman.
Ben je nog aan het kijken?
I started doing stand-up comedy in 1997. I always forget if it was 97, 98. None of that matters. But I was living in Boston, Massachusetts. And I went to college for theater, for acting. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to be an actor. I mean, listen, I still would, if someone, put a movie role in my hand, I'd love to act. It wasn't like I turned away from it, but while I was in college, I don't know what happened. It was a slow series of events. I just started. It's very interesting. I wasn't watching a lot of stand-up. I was reading a lot of stand-up biographies.
Yeah.
I was reading Roseanne Barr. I know she's gone off the rails now and probably lost everyone's respect, but her biography is incredible. And she wrote it. I don't even remember the name, but I read it. I was relating with the spirit of rebellion. And then I started listening to Lenny Bruce records when I was a senior in college. And I felt like I wanted to do stand-up. Now, the problem is the stand-up I wanted to do in the environment I wanted to be in no longer existed.
Yeah.
And hadn't since the 60s in New York. I really was pretty naive. I didn't know what comedy clubs were like or anything like that. So, I asked my professors at college, because it was a theater school, how do I get into comedy? And they basically dismissed it and said, I don't know. A lot of people start out when they're really young and they live in New York. You probably won't even make it if you try. And this is a theater school and we don't do that kind of thing. And anyway, I had no guidance. I had an interest for years, but just felt very resigned to, I guess I'll do nothing about it. And then honest to God, I just looked through the newspaper for any sign of anything that said open mic. I could not find anything. And then I went to an audition and I met someone named Eugene Merman. I don't know if you know who that is.
I'm a big fan of Eugene Merman.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you know who he is.
I've seen him live in Brooklyn 10 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great. And I'm sure he's toured the UK, maybe not as much recently, but
no, I think ever since he really got picked up with Bob's Burgers, he hasn't been touring Europe or the UK that much. Yeah, I saw him really accidentally. The first time I ever went to New York, 2011, there was Eugene Merman and Friends live festival, and I saw Patton Oswalt, Jem Gaffigan, Eugene Merman. That was my first exposure, but he was brilliant. Sorry to interrupt, but
no, I love it.
I'm excited when somebody names Eugene Merman. It doesn't happen often in Belgium.
Right, totally. Well, then I'll get a tiny more detail. The audition we had to do was not an acting audition for a TV show, but there was a game show. And I don't even know if it ever aired, but they were looking for a host and they wanted funny people. And you had to stand on stage at a comedy club and say one funny thing about yourself, and that's it. I don't even think I said anything funny. I was very much a depressive back then and hated my day job and probably just went, And then when I walked off stage, Eugene Merman was sitting there. In my memory, it's like he's this Andy Warhol kind of figure. And he's sitting there and he says, "Are you a stand-up comedian?" And I lied and went, "Yes," because I thought he was some big, important person. I didn't realize he was my age. He had only been doing stand-up less than a year and was just a guy running an open mic, but he seemed bigger than that to me. And he handed me a flyer for his comedy show and said, "It's every Thursday night at 11 p.m. And you just get on stage and talk." And I said, "Oh, thank you. I'd love to do it." And then I went home and I called him really late at night and said, "I'm the girl you met today. I'm sorry I lied. I'm not really a comedian. So if you don't want me to do your show, that's okay." And he goes, "It's just an open mic." And so I went and did it and I fell in love with it because his show enabled me to do stand-up the way that I had fantasized about it, sitting on a stool, smoking a cigarette, kind of not being funny, but just talking about issues of the day that I thought were important. And I was performing for about 25 other people exactly my age.
Yeah.
So, I just fell in love at that moment. But had I had the normal comedy club experience, I probably would have hated it. Yeah. And it wasn't until about a year later that I had that kind of experience. So I was in Eugene's circle of friends in Boston and we performed every weekend together. And, if it weren't for him, I don't know when or how I would have gotten on stage.
I'm a big fan of your bit, the green one.
Yes,
Lemon
about
versus
lemons
lime.
and
I
limes.
think it's one of the best written pieces of stand-up I ever heard.
Oh my God, thank you.
Yeah, I love it. I really do. I really love it. But I remember I tweeted at you like when I discovered your stand-up a couple of years ago. And you were like, "Yeah, but that's my older material. I now have I have some other stuff. It's not like that anymore." It's just like and I saw you live in Amsterdam, and I get it, but it's less observational now and more state of mind.
Well, what's so funny is I'm surprised I said that. If you mentioned that bit in the tweet, I'm surprised I said that, if that makes any sense, because that bit I'm really proud of.
Yeah.
It's usually my stuff about getting divorced and all that I kind of tell people, "Oh, I have some other stuff," only because I have a lot of opinions. And I have a stand-up special called "I'm Gonna Die Alone and I Feel Fine," which a lot of people mistake for being a sentiment about being single. It's about not wanting kids. And in that special, I'm very defensive about relationships. I'm in a certain place in my life because I had just left a marriage. I was having fun. I was turning 40. It was a moment in time that I'm very proud of in terms of bringing that all to the stage. But a lot of times people find it years later, especially young women.
Yeah.
And they're like, "I'm just like you." And I want to be like, no. You need to grow beyond that defensive person, So it's funny that I kind of shooed you away from that compliment because I'm very proud of that bit too. And to be quite honest, this is not the funniest part about me, probably the most annoying part about me is I don't think I've changed that much, if that makes sense. Like in the sense of, I just talk about whatever's going on in my life at the time.
Yeah.
So at the time of the special you're talking about, I had a lot going on in my personal life. I was dating again. I was divorcing. I was turning 40. And when you saw me in Amsterdam in 2019, truly, I had just been on tour for a year. So I didn't have a big amount of my own life to bring to you. I only could talk a little more observationally. I was kind of going way back in the memory machine, talking about the generational differences. So certainly not a choice or anything I think I grew or changed into. I think the topics for me will always change based on my life or lack thereof, a life at a certain point. But I do think, from the time you saw me in Amsterdam to the time you watched from 6 years before that, I had just been on stage probably 1,000 more times.
Yeah.
So I think that happens to every comedian. It's like when someone gets a haircut, but you can't tell what's different. You go, something's different about them. But I really think it's the amount of hours they've been on stage. And you just sort of get more comfortable. And then, of course, if you're working on any aspect of yourself outside of comedy, you start to come into your own, and somehow that shows up on stage.
Maybe the biggest difference I noticed between your old stand-up and your set in Amsterdam is that you kind of found your zen on stage.
Yeah.
Because you were on a stool, you were smoking a cigarette. Were you smoking a cigarette?
I was not
remember.
smoking. I don't smoke anymore, but...
I don't know why. You sat on a stool and I immediately imagined a cigarette in your hand.
That is the greatest compliment I could get as a former smoker.
The Lenny Bruce thing that just popped up, like probably drinking something, smoking a cigarette, getting arrested afterwards.
But you know what's so funny? Now that you asked me if I was smoking, I'm like, wait, was there smoking allowed in that theater? I could have had one cigarette.
Oh yeah, you could. And I think I know in Belgium you can smoke on stage because it's part of the show.
Wow.
That's the rule.
I got to move there, even though I don't smoke anymore, but I would smoke on stage. Well, it's so funny you mentioned all this. You know, I went through a phase maybe 10 years ago where my stand-up got really angry. Mm-hmm. And I think I was going through some hard things in my life, but it's not like in real life I would walking around screaming at everyone. But I thought it was funny to be angry, like almost like I thought it was kind of charming how Joan Rivers in her late 70s was angry. Mm-hmm. I thought that was funny because she's an old lady.
Yeah.
And I think I was trying to do something like that, but I was in my 30s, so it's like less funny because it just looks like an angry person. You know, she can get away with it because she's a tiny elderly woman. So I think I went through, you know, what's interesting is that night that I sat down on Eugene's show is the closest I've ever been to who I am now, except with better writing and more of a sense of who I am. And then I lost myself for many years. So it's funny when people ask me when I started doing stand-up, it's like, I mean, and you know this as a performer, what we're going to tell you is when we started doing open mics and not getting paid. And then that leads to 10 more years of that not getting paid and a lot of development. And so when I moved to New York City a few years later after Boston, there was a lot of suddenly entertainment industry people in the audience, people that worked at the Comedy Central network and giving us advice after shows that were not good advice based on what they wanted. Yeah. You know, they were thinking in TV terms. Do you have any bits that are 80 seconds long that would go real well with, you know, with our show format? And I got obsessed with stopping my long-winded monologues that weave in and out. And I got obsessed with short jokes, but I'm not good at it. So I went through a whole phase where I was terrible at comedy because I wasn't even doing what came naturally to me. And then I found my way again. So it's like, when you talk about how much I've changed, it was like, I'm actually returning more to my original self, which is interesting because I always had it. I always had the right idea for me. I just had to get better at that. And I took such a detour that it took me a while to get back to it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was looking at your influences in comedy, and you talk a lot about Joan Rivers. And the absolute proof, I have your books, but I can't show it to you that I have them because I lent them to a friend, is this book.
Yes.
Because of your book, I bought this book, Enter Talking from Joan Rivers. And I was watching the In Bed with Joan that you did.
Yeah. Her podcast, yeah.
And that just looked like a lot of fun. Just two really funny women having the time of their life.
What you saw there was my abject anxiety at meeting her for the first time. And you know, when you're sometimes really anxious or scared, you get a better performance because you're just in the zone. Like you can't fail. But wait, let me ask you, did you read her book, Enter Talking?
Yeah, I did.
Did you like it?
Yeah. It's been a while. It's been like 2 years since I've read it.
Well, it's sort of, I recommend it to people if they can find it, because it's sort of also, even if you don't like her, know nothing about her, who cares? It's almost like what it really is a cultural look at New York City comedy in the 60s in the Village, because she was coming up with Lenny and George Carlin and Bill Cosby before we knew. And Woody Allen before we knew. And it really is interesting. I mean, there weren't proper comedy clubs then. You know, people performed at coffee shops, and obviously it was harder for women, but she had this audience. Anyway, it's just interesting because I have to say my true comedy influences are probably not her in terms of her jokes, but that book. She's a big influence on me in terms of her drive and her inability to give up. And I needed that at a lot of times in my life.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite stories is that I used to carry that book in my purse every day when I was a young comedian living in New York City. And it was like a Bible to me, and I would read it at all of my day jobs. And then I would go do comedy at night for 10 people and bomb and just think, what am I doing? And one day I was walking down the street and there was no one else on the sidewalk, and she was walking by me. And I wanted to stop and say, please sign my book. Something said, don't bug her, because if this doesn't go well, you're going to lose everything right now. You're going to lose your hero.
Yeah.
She's mean to you, don't meet your heroes. I said, maybe someday if it's meant to be, she'll sign your book. And then 20 years later, my agent ended up representing her. We became friendly the year before she died. We had lunch one day in New York City. I brought the book and she signed it. And so when doing her podcast In Bed with Joan was when I met her for the first time. And it was a very funny day because there had been this weird plane crash and it was a lot of funny news stories about it. And she was filming it and she saw me before we started filming. She never met me. She didn't know me. And she said, I don't mean to be rude, but I don't talk to the guests except on camera. So hello, good to see you. I'll see you. And so I was joking around with the camera crew about this plane crash and I said something funny and she turned and said, oh, wait, you're funny. And then she dropped her rule of I don't talk off camera. And she came over to me and gave me a feather boa and told me to put it on. And I mean, I honestly, I was trying not to cry during that interview. I was trying to act so normal because it's like my lifelong dream. I felt like things were going to be okay because I got to talk to Joan. And so that's it. She's not a huge influence on me in terms of her jokes, but that for sure, her story, her struggle and her triumph.
Yeah, it made me laugh watching you make her laugh. Telling the story about your grandmother dying on a linoleum floor. Within the 5 minutes of meeting her, I don't know how they cut it, but it seemed like that.
It probably was pretty soon within meeting her. And that at the time was, my closing bit in my act. So, I kind of knew it had some legs. Like I knew it was technically funny, but I knew also it would be really a wild thing to say to someone who was elderly, like to talk about dying alone on the floor. And so I just thought there would be something kind of magical about that moment. It turned out to work out pretty well.
I wanted to talk to you a little about women in late night because, of course, you wrote for Chelsea lately.
Yeah.
And I can't really assess how well represented women are in late night and late night writing in America.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Also because Belgium does not have a late night show or even a lot of women in comedy at the time.
Really? Can I ask you something? I know this is your show, but do you think the lack of female comics is... I'm sure you're not saying this because I know you're smart and with it, but sometimes when people say that, it's because they don't know how many there are, but I know that you do because you're on the inside.
Yeah.
So it's not a case of there aren't actually, so it's not a case of, oh no, there's tons, but people don't know them because they're not famous, right?
Yeah.
They're actually, you're saying like not getting into it. Are they more, if they're in comedy, are they more writing? Are they acting? Like, why are they not drawn to it? Do you think, is it because of the men or they weren't raised that way to think it was possible?
That's a good question. And the funny thing is your name gets dropped in the answer for that a little bit. The thing is that stand-up comedy only started booming around 2005, 2006 in Belgium. Before that, the entire comedy scene was dominated by 3 or 4 older men who did comedy, but not exactly stand-up.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't until YouTube came along that people got exposed to other kinds of comedy, and that was just the men. Now we're 15 years later and we have about 4 or 5 women in comedy, 2 of them going professional.
That's cool.
One of them I brought with me to Amsterdam to see her show.
Oh, yes, I remember. I met her, yeah.
And she was just starting out then. But the fun thing about that was she had never seen a female comedian live or someone who represented something she did. Because we had women in comedy in Belgium, but it's not stand-up comedy in Belgium. It was singing
getting dressed up, a little bit of acting, monologues. We have women in comedy in Belgium who did shows from Whoopi Goldberg. Bought monologues from Whoopi Goldberg and brought those to a Belgian.
Oh, I see.
So there's no reference for her. There's nothing on a stage, any remotely resembling something she wants to be. So seeing you in Amsterdam, one, going out of the country, but for some Belgians, that's still, going to Amsterdam is a big thing. And seeing someone from Netflix and seeing someone from her gender, bringing something she would like to do was a really, really big thing for her.
Oh my God, I feel like I'm going to cry. I'm so glad you told me that. I had no idea. And that is, that must be really powerful. I mean, I think that's the sad thing that happens is, a lot of the women here too grow up with male role models in comedy. You kind of don't even notice you're doing it, but you start to talk about things they talk about. You kind of keep your own experiences. I don't know. It can be hard when there isn't representation, because there's, you subconsciously, you have a lot less choices of, I don't even know how to say it, what to talk about. What's interesting about America, and I'll answer your Chelsea question, is, I grew up in the 70s and 80s in America. There was so many women on TV being funny, from the sketch comedy, the Carol Burnett show. There were sitcom actresses. There was Roseanne Barr, Joan Rivers guest hosting Carson, then getting her own show. There was a ton of female comedian stand-up shows. Now, looking back, those women would say, well, it was a show on HBO called Women Are Funny, which, kind of put us, separate from the men, which was kind of sexist. So I get that it wasn't a perfect time. But for me, I saw a lot on TV. It never dawned on me as a child, I'm not represented, if I even knew what that meant. I can't do comedy. I only thought I couldn't do comedy because I was a kid. I was like, I don't know how you grow up and find out how to do comedy, I thought someone had to appoint you, but never, ever did I think my gender couldn't do it. Never, ever. Because it was so represented. And then something happened where it stopped, but anyway, working for Chelsea, I truly, Chelsea, knowing her personally, and I still know her really well now, she may not want me to speak like this for her, but just my observation as her friend, and I would say this to her, I feel like these days she's a lot more keyed into women's issues in terms of, I don't mean political ones like abortion, I mean in the entertainment industry, she'll say, oh, well, that's sexist. Oh, well, of course men do that. And she's noticing it now. But when I wrote for her, if I had said, oh, it's so great that you're a woman in late night and women, she goes, just shut up. That stuff is so stupid. We're so past that. I'm just a person, So she had a ton of women in her writer's room, but she, I think at the time would have said that has nothing to do with me being a woman or trying to do anything. She hired people she thought were funny, and maybe they related to her because she was a woman, but she wasn't trying to do anything empowering per se. So let's see, there was Fortune Feimster was a writer. Our head writer was named Sue Murphy. Sarah Colonna, my friend, was a writer. Heather McDonald, myself. So there were 5 female writers and 3 male writers. So yeah, it was more women than men in the room. And it was, my dear friend, Chris, he's a guy, he was my writing partner on the show. And he said he preferred to work and write for women. He found their humor to be more expansive about a lot of things, and it was a very gender equal place. I never had to think about the fact that I'm a woman because I was, like you said, represented. I had friends. I mean, there were times that the boys we worked with were annoying, or every once in a while, like our boss, who was a man, if Chelsea wasn't in the room, we have these meetings every morning where we pick the jokes for the day or the topics. And sometimes Chelsea wouldn't come to those. She was getting really famous, so she might be flying in from a gig or doing something else. So we would pick the topics that we thought she might like. And oftentimes the women would clash in the room against our male boss. He'd say, she doesn't want to do that. And we'd say, trust us, we know her, on a different level than you do. And we usually were right. But, stuff like that, gender gets highlighted, but there was no sexism per se. So I had a really easy ride in that sense.
Do you think there's a shortage of female hosts in America? Because for a while, the gold standard was a man hosting a late night show.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have no shortage of late night hosts, period, any gender.
No,
and
no, you don't.
we could give some to Belgium, because to me, I think that market has been so watered down.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's just too many hosts. Some of them happen to, and they do all happen to be men. That's not why I'm saying that. It's just like too much already.
Yeah.
It's makes it really hard too for the writers to, you know, try to do different things in the other shows. But no, of course, I don't think there are enough women in late night. Now, at the same time, let's see, we probably have 6 men in traditional comedy late night shows right now.
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to add 6 women and make it equal of 12 late night shows? No. But in general, I do wish, you know, maybe there would be an even amount, but less shows altogether. And I think women get relegated to daytime talk show. I don't know if you guys have those in Belgium.
No, but I know what like, you mean, like Ellen and
like Ellen and Rosie O'Donnell used to have one.
Yeah.
And The View, you know, Joy Behar, Whoopi Goldberg, and Rosie O'Donnell, who all were on The View, which is on in the morning, are literally 3 of the most groundbreaking, funniest comedians. Joy Behar is a powerhouse. She's maybe not someone you and me would want to go pay and see one night because she's a little out of our generation, but she's a killer on stage. This is New York badass. Whoopi Goldberg, brilliant. Rosie O'Donnell. And they're just yelling and screaming about politics in the morning, and they're really funny. And Ellen, I mean, all of the rumors you've heard about her are true. She's kind of not great to her staff. I've never met her, but I know people that worked for her. But she's very funny, and she's daytime host. Rosie had her own show for a while. So it's like, you know, and they don't even do their comedy on their show. You wouldn't know it if you came from another planet, that these are some of the, not only the fun, like groundbreaking comedians in ways that Jimmy Kimmel isn't. And, you know, and so, I mean, I love Jimmy Kimmel. Actually, he's a great person, but I'm just saying that, like, I don't know why, because you know, when it blows my mind, because women watch late night TV. Now, there are more things coming through, and because it's so fractured and there's so many shows, there are women hosting things on other channels. You know, Sam Jay is a really funny comedian in America who just got a late night show on HBO Max. But there's been other late night shows where it's like a YouTube star hosts it, or an actress. And it's like, why? Why are we going there first?
Yeah.
When there's so many funny comedians that I truly believe people will give late night shows a chance, even if they don't know who the host. As long as the topics are funny, they'll grow to love the host. Like Jon Stewart was an absolute nobody when he started hosting The Daily Show.
Yeah.
And then when he got replaced, people wanted him to be replaced with a somebody. So there were women in the running, but they were Tina Fey and this, you know, she's not going to do that. So it's always that kind of thing of, oh no, we want women. There's always a reason that you kind of can't argue. Oh, we would love to have a woman host, but you know, all the famous women that we would want to host are so busy with other things. There's the thing in late night comedy where men who are unknown get shows, women who are unknown don't. And I mean unknown to the public. They're not unknown to the industry and to their fans. But yeah, so with that, it's like weird little subtle things that if I were to talk about this to anyone but someone like you, they'd argue me. Oh, well, you can't prove that. You can't say that. You know, it's like it just gets annoying to even think about. But yeah, I think it's underrepresented for sure. And it's really just like, what is the holdup? We are progressing as a society in so many ways. Let's do this.
Yeah, here in Belgium, we are still discovering that sometimes a comedian just does it better.
Of course. Yes, of course. It's 100% true that within that specific complaint about that kind of world, where you're saying, you know, presenters, hosts, absolutely, it is such an industry thing where they don't think to go to the comedians. It's almost like they think of us as wild animals that are going to go off at a moment's notice. Yeah. But if you look at, you know, people who host our awards shows here, it's always funnier, the comedian. And also a lot of times comedians know when to be funny and know when to just say the thing and move on. And they have such natural rhythm and timing and self-awareness. They know everything that's going on in the room. I mean, it's painful to watch a theater actor do anything but theater act.
Yeah.
You know, it is. We are so not respected, and yet everyone wants a piece of us in that sense. Everyone's always looking for a comedian to do this or that, and then once they let you do it, they don't trust you.
Yeah, I'm a big Conan fan.
Conan is awesome
because he's one of those hosts that just goes with you. Wherever you take the interview, wherever you take the subject, he's just a yes man, of course. And because you did some amazing interviews with him also.
I do want to give a big shout out to how an amazing person he is. We have a lot in common because we're both from Massachusetts. Our towns were very close to each other. I'm not Irish, but you know, you're kind of an honorary Irish person when you're from Massachusetts or Boston. And we have similar family, you know, upbringings. And every time I've done his show, they've allowed me to, as we call it in America, do panel, which is you're not doing stand up, but you're sitting on the couch next to him and talking. And those are planned bits as well. But a lot of times, you know, the audience didn't know who I was. So if they don't know who I am, they're not going to totally laugh or get my sense of humor. But if the host laughs, then they go, oh, okay, he likes her. And I had a lot of dark jokes about, like what you said with Joan. At the time I was going around promoting my special, and I did talk about my Nana dying alone. And Conan's got that dark Boston humor, and he would crack up, and whether he's faking it or not, he was doing the right thing as the host. He wasn't making fun of me and going, well, that's a little weird, you know. And he would always come into my dressing room. That sounds creepy. It was a backstage living. He would come into my he would always watch me get dressed.
Turn into a little Louis C.K. story there.
He'd come backstage and he'd say, what do you want to work on today? And I'd say, I want to do this skit where, you know, I've always wanted to be in a movie where they have Boston accents and I want to pretend to audition. He would go along with me and encourage me. And so then one night I was doing stand-up in Los Angeles a couple of years ago, and he was about to go out on tour, and he was just working out some material. And he went on after me, and I talked a lot about my mom being from Boston, and he was totally joking, but he got on stage and went, well, Jen just did my whole act. I mean, I was going to talk about my mother, but it was so, what it really showed was he watched the person that went before him. He laughed. He was generous. He, you know, a lot of people don't do that. And he was nice backstage. And so he's just an actual quality human being who I don't get I just don't get a bad vibe from it. I don't get a sexist vibe, and I don't get a condescending, you know, I'm famous, you're not vibe. I think he's one of the good ones.
I have to go off topic because you mentioned your mom. I have never met your mom. I have not seen your mom, maybe on your Instagram, but I know for a fact you do the best impression of your mom.
I do. I've been doing, you know, my mom, I don't know if people of Belgium are familiar with the Boston accent. Probably all sounds the same to them.
Mark Wahlberg.
Exactly.
That's your reference, Mark Wahlberg.
That's great. Well, you know, I mean, listen, if I'm in England, I can't tell this accent from that. All sounds the same to me, you know. So I'm sure Boston and New York accents sound the same to people who aren't in America. But, you know, Boston accent, like they don't pronounce it as. So I'm like, oh my God. And like God, G-O-D is G-A-W-D. And I impersonate my mom, but what makes her impression dick, I think, is she's always smiling. Like I have to smile when I talk to do it. And she's always smiling, even if she's saying the darkest things. Like, I think the neighbor died. Like, you know, and, but I've been doing it since I was a little kid. I would just impersonate her around the house and talk about, actually, my biggest comedy influence is probably, you're familiar with Howard Stern, right?
Yes.
I started listening to his radio show when I was in college, and he talked about his parents all the time and imitated their accents. And I thought, oh my God, that's that thing I do just at home to my mom. And I really related to how much his parents were a part of his life, for better or for worse. And that's the stuff I started doing on stage right away. So it really was big influence by Howard, knowing that, you know, people thought that was funny. And so, yeah, but my mom is a trip. If anyone wants to go to my Instagram, you'll see videos of her.
it's for me, it's the bottom row of teeth you show, like the I don't know why that tickles me so much, but it does.
I love it. Sometimes it's the simplest, dumbest things.
Yeah,
that
because
make us laugh.
and in Amsterdam you were imitating your mom, and I love that you can make people laugh with an imitation nobody has ever seen before in Amsterdam. You know, you're impersonating a sweet old lady from Massachusetts in Amsterdam.
Yeah, that's true. Well, you know, I think people in Amsterdam would be more open to that than anywhere. Not that, I mean, her impression does well everywhere just because there's something about it. But I would think that like European countries are more open to it because it's almost like doing a character, you know,
Yeah.
and I feel like that's always been kind of a thing. But I have to say that show in Amsterdam was one of my best shows that year, better than a lot of shows I had in the States, because I don't know why it wasn't me. I mean, you know, I'm the same every show. I felt so free. Like the way that you guys were laughing and engaging and understanding me, I could just, you can kind of tell by the kind of laughter you're getting that everyone's on board and they're going to have a good time and they're not offended or they're not analyzing what you're saying or they're not taking it personally. And so I did a lot of improvising or just, I just felt so loose because you guys made me feel so incredibly welcome. And I never once felt like I had to fight for your attentions or anything. And I just was like, God, can I move here?
One of the things you said stuck with me in Amsterdam because we came to see you around the time Hannah Gadsby broke through with Nanette.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And although I don't really think it's that funny, I do respect it as a piece of art and performance, and it has a powerful message.
Okay.
But it created this weird void in the audience. When you're a man watching a woman ranting about men, you just can't help feel a little uneasy, thinking you're not supposed to be there.
Yeah, no, it's okay. But it's good to talk about that. That's your first reaction. Because then.
Yeah, but what I wanted to say was you said just like a throwaway line between jokes. Like, by the way, if you're a man, don't feel bad or offended because you paid money to see a woman talk. And that made you one of the good ones.
Yeah. And you know, I'm kidding when I say that, but it's a good line.
It's a good line.
I'm
I remembered it because it made people fell at ease because of that line.
Well, you know what's interesting about Hannah's special that I do want to not defend, but I think give some perspective on is, you know, for anyone listening, she's from that, and I know you know this, I'm just telling the listeners, she's from that world in Australia where, and it's probably similar in maybe in Belgium or Europe in some places, but definitely not anything like America where they don't have comedy clubs. You don't go do 10 minutes of your bit here, 10 minutes there, put together an hour. You do a one-person show, you work on it all year, and then you do it at the Melbourne Comedy Festival. And so it's very much a theatrical experience. It's a one-person show. And to make it stand out, you have more of a conceptual thing, you know. You're always kind of having one eye on the marketing, if that makes sense. And her special started doing really well because I think a lot of comedians related to me what was the backbone of it, which is what would happen if we kept telling the story beyond the punchline. So if you have jokes about getting beaten up as a little kid because you're a geek or whatever, you make a joke and then you move on. But the serious version of that story is, no, then you went home and cried and And why in comedy can't we tell what happened in real life? Can we do both? And so her gimmick was, you know, I'm quitting comedy. Like she didn't mean in general. She meant during the performance. Like that was the shtick. And anyway, so I heard about this and she went around the world with it at all the festivals. And I kept hearing about this thing that to me sounded so freeing. And honestly, I didn't know it had anything to do with gender. I thought it was a comedian's journey of, listen, people, I am so tired of having to make you guys laugh, not guys and girls laugh. You know, we're deeper than this and you're going to enjoy our work because it doesn't have to be bang and boom and bing the whole time. So when I went to see her in New York City off Broadway before she got her special. I saw it 3 times. I kept bringing people with me. It was, I think if you saw it live, you would actually have felt that it was for you because there was something about the vibe in the room where you can feel the tension of the men.
Yeah.
And they don't feel mad or like they're going to storm the stage. That you just feel that they're uncomfortable. And what she says is, now you know how we felt the whole time. And she kind of brings them into it. And then we all get into the comedian's mindset where she turns the audience against other audiences that are out there. Like, now that you guys get how comedy works and how you've been manipulated the whole time with punchlines, now can you listen to the real story? And everyone's like, yeah, like, I feel like from what I've heard from people that I know would love it if they saw it live, especially if as comedians, they did not like the special. And I didn't watch the Netflix special. And I think it does not translate well, probably on TV. Yeah, you had to be there because she gets the room really tense and then breaks it open laughing. And it just does not translate on TV. So anyway, I took that special not so much as a woman's journey, but as a comedian's journey of, hey, you know what? I can do more than this. Like, let me, you guys can sit there for a minute and listen without laughing, And I think it was so great because it made me feel, I haven't done anything like she did since then, but I feel like in my back pocket, I have permission if I want to maybe tell a sad story on stage, but as far as making the men comfortable, I'm performing sometimes late at night in front of like Donald Trump supporters, and so I have to say little things that make it I mean, I really do mean it. Like, at the very least, they're there watching a woman speak and letting it happen. Like, it shouldn't be that makes them great. But in this day and age, like, I'll take it. It's pretty good. And I say it because I want, like, if I go see a Black comedian, I know white people are going to get made fun of. I love it because I want to be on the inside. Like, tell me, like, make fun of me, not me specifically, but I want to know the perspective, like, what is it like dealing with white people? And I feel for that moment, I'm being led into a secret and that I'm okay in that moment, And so that's how I want my audience to feel is like, hey, in the real world, we might have our issues, but tonight, like, we're all in this together, and I'm letting you in because I trust you on my little secret about like what we say about men when they're not around or how we fear them.
Oh yeah, but I'm perfectly okay with white men getting the short end of the leash this time.
Oh no, I know you are, but I just think it's an interesting point that you bring up, which is like, it's still, I mean, I still feel that same way. Like, I get, you want to do the, not me, you want to yell out, not me. And I think that's I think making someone feel that way is actually part of the comedy, and me feeling that way is part of my relaxing into watching someone else. It's embarrassing to admit, but it's part of our learning experience.
Maybe it was just a lot because 2019, it was just like this crossbreed of Me Too and Hannah Gadsby becoming who she is now.
Yeah.
Also, if you didn't see the special immediately on Netflix, like I saw it like a month after it broke open the scene, and you read all these articles about, now this is how stand-up comedy is supposed to be, and you go, but this is how I've been doing this for 15 years. How, like, already
it's
a little bit defensive.
Yeah. Of course it is. So, listen, and that's the comedian thing too. I cannot read anything about anything and then enjoy it, because the hype, it's like, and that's why I knew nothing about it. I went to see it in a small theater and I was like, oh my God. And I wasn't like, this is important or this is how comedy should be done. I was like, this is one way to do it. And this is such a cool voice. And she's such a goofball in real life. So I really felt like, because, of course the industry will glom onto someone. I mean, she's amazingly talented, but it's almost unfortunate for her that her special came out during that time, because as much as some people might have been clamoring for it, you're right. It sometimes there is an overkill. The industry can invite you in when they think that you have a message that helps them with their brand. Yeah. If that had come out 2 years earlier, I really think we'd be talking about it more as like, that was fun and different, or wow, that was moving, instead of like, all right already, I'm getting it from all ends here,
Yeah.
Because I do think like what I've heard is somehow like her silly goofballness, I think, was lost in the TV translation. Yeah. And I don't know. I didn't see it, but
I've been thinking about it for the last week, accidentally, because the new Bo Burnham special dropped.
That's on my to-do list to watch today. Yeah.
And it's so good and different and special. And I'm defending that is comedy. But I'm also saying, the first show, Hannah Gadsby, it wasn't really comedy. So I'm getting caught on a lie by myself in some way.
Yeah, good. Because I notice men are doing that. And I don't know if you've seen the tweets, but women are tweeting like, oh, I guess Bo Burnham is okay. But the thing too is like men were getting really defensive about Hannah's special because they were acting as though someone was actually taking comedy away from them, like as if someone had decided they're going to have to do that from now on.
Yeah.
And like, what's the worst case scenario? Like, let's say that happened. Like God comes down and goes, no, this is comedy. You have to do a one-person show about your pain. Like, then do it and shut up. You know, it was just like an irrational fear. And I get it. Like, I'm a middle-aged white straight cis woman, and like no one needs my comedy right now. Does that make sense? Like, you know, I'm okay to move aside for whatever needs room, whoever needs to come up if I'm in the way. But I think that it was the first time men were having to deal with like that fear, even though I don't even think it really happened. It certainly, we still have plenty of other, you know, comedy specials where white men are going, I'm triggered, you know, I can't say anything anymore. And, but I do think it's good to look at that because, you watched Bo's special with no cultural context in that sense. Like he made a special about something you went through, right? Like pandemic, quarantine, you know, it comes at you with a more relatable package. So of course it's going to relate with you even more. But when stuff like that comes out, when Bo's stuff comes out, I go, oh, I am so mediocre. I relax into it. I go, oh, I'm never going to be able to do that. So
Well, it did made me think about you because the anxiety, he talks a lot about anxiety and depression in some sort of way.
Oh, that's great. I can't wait to watch it. You know, he's someone that, of course, like I judged when he first came out. Like he's my Hannah Gadsby. So
yeah.
when he first got famous for his YouTube videos, I was like, who the fuck I can swear. Yeah, fuck this kid. YouTube videos. This isn't comedy. I'd never seen them, but I had decided this is not comedy. Oh, we're just going to make people famous from I mean, I hated him. Never met him. Then I saw some of his work. Then I met him, got to know him. And I was like, oh, he's such an incredible person. He's so funny. He's so talented. What a brilliant director. He's just a Renaissance man. He's great. He's so great. Yeah. But I had that same reaction of like, you know, I get so scared. They're going to take it all away from me because what do I have to do? YouTube music now? No, you don't, Jen.
No, it was because, I was watching the special last week, and the last year I have been having major anxiety attacks to the point I couldn't sleep. Yeah. Seeing a comedian open up about it and just blatantly saying what it is, how it feels like, meant a lot. And then I saw you announce a podcast about anxiety.
Yes, so thanks for noticing.
So I'm kind of excited about it.
Yeah, that was something that came to me during the pandemic. You know, a lot of comedians were doing those online Zoom shows. Mm-hmm. And I didn't feel like doing one. I just like didn't need that much attention. But I've had panic and anxiety since I was 8, and it was diagnosed in my 20s. And I mean, it was bad. Everything, all the things. It was horrible. And it's very much under control now. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't having the same kind of first time anxiety that a lot of people had during the pandemic. And I felt like, well, gee, maybe instead of doing a Zoom comedy show, I could help people. So I started doing these relaxation classes over Zoom, teaching people proper breathing and muscle relaxation and some things they could think about. And then I wrote, I put together like a big file full of anxiety tips, free podcasts they could listen to, articles to read, books to buy, blah, blah, blah. And I would email it to anyone who asked. I sent out over like 7,000 emails this past year. And I realized, gee, I wonder if there's like a podcast in this where a comedian, like I'm not trying to be funny about it, but I'm down to earth and I can talk to people about anxiety. And so I pitched it to a podcast company, and they said, yeah, let's do it. And they paid me a little bit of money to get going. And so it's going to premiere in August, and it's going to come out twice a week, about half-hour episodes. And I interview all kinds of people that can help us with anxiety. So I interview neuroscientists, psychiatrists, meditation experts, artists, authors, anybody. And each week we'll have a different kind of theme, whether it's meditation for your anxiety or panic attacks or whatever. And it's, it'll go for 46 weeks. Hopefully I'll just get to keep doing it. it was the joy of my life to help people with their anxiety last year. And I love talking about it. And so I'm trying to add to my career, maybe becoming some kind of speaker about anxiety, not a stand-up comedy act, but sometimes they hire people, you could speak at a college or a corporation or just something. And I think because, like we were talking about before, if you're going to hire a presenter for something, go with a comedian. If I'm going to talk to a room full of people who are new to anxiety, I think I know, because I can read a room so well as a comedian, I know what they're thinking before they think it. Yeah, but not me. No, mine's bad. And you kind of know how to get through all their defensiveness and get them to listen. So I'm really excited about the podcast. It's called Anxiety Bites, BITES.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll come out in August, and I'll be, promoting it all over my social media and stuff. But I hope it helps. My goal is somebody like yourself that has anxiety for the first time just sort of types the word into the computer and it pops up, and they get to hear something that's aimed at them. It's not aimed at experts.
Yeah. Yeah, because the first time I had an anxiety attack was last summer.
Yeah.
And the first time you have one, you just think you're gonna die. I thought I was having a heart attack.
Yeah.
And then I started having them regularly, every time I put my head down on a pillow, it felt like my heart was gonna burst out of my chest.
Oh.
And I couldn't describe it. Like my girlfriend's a doctor, and I couldn't describe, like, I'm not feeling bad, or I don't think it's medical, but I just feel like I'm having a heart attack, and she sounds like anxiety, but I don't know if it's anxiety. So just hearing people like you, hearing people like Bo talking about it, it helps a lot. Doesn't make me feel alone about it.
No, and it's such a lonely thing because it's in your head, and you have to diagnose yourself. And, what I realized is I started having anxiety before there was the internet. So I thought, if I tell anyone whatever, and there's no words for it, if I tell someone what's happening and they find out it's not physical, I'm going to have to live in a mental institution my whole life. I really thought that because, back in my day, you were either sane or crazy. There was no spectrum. I mean, listen, we've all had anxiety the whole time since we were cave people, but no one talked about it. And so I thought kids today, or anyone today having anxiety for the first time, whether you're 20 or 40, I thought, no problem, easy for them. They can just Google it and they'll figure it out. And it is not true. And that's why I also wanted to help, because I was blind to how many people were developing anxiety and how people still, even with all the resources out there, they don't know where to start. And I also think a lot of people think it's a disorder that a doctor has to tell you have. And then they think, well, I don't want to have that. And it's like, it's very fluid. It comes, it goes. Mm-hmm. And the worst part is, as I'm sure you experienced, the first time you have an anxiety attack, once you kind of know in your heart it's anxiety, you don't know why it happened. And your number one goal is can't let that happen again. And your subconscious starts worrying and you're going to have one again because now it's all you're even subconsciously thinking about. And so it's a very simple fix. It just takes a little bit of commitment. And the fixes for anxiety are so simple that people don't believe it can be true. And so, a lot of people with anxiety are very stubborn, very perfectionistic. So that's where I think as a comedian, I can be helpful because, we know how to open people up to trust us, I think. Mm-hmm. So it's so scary. It's such a lonely thing because it is in our heads.
Yeah, I discovered Bo actually quit comedy for a couple of years because he started having attacks on stage, having anxiety attacks on stage. And I couldn't even figure out how that must have been like, because I haven't been on stage for 8 months now.
Yeah.
And I'm terrified to go back on stage and have one on stage.
If I can give you any hope, my whole life of having panic and anxiety, the one place I never did was on stage. And I had a neuroscientist explain it to me recently. The armchair psychologist might say, because you crave love and attention. And he said, no. It's because when you're doing your artwork, your craft, you're in a flow and really nothing can interrupt you. Like, nothing can interrupt that state of mind. So if you're working on something, if you draw or paint, you probably notice you're not going to have anxiety during those times. It's because you're in a flow state. So you might not have that when you get back on stage, you know? And it's funny because I saw Bo a couple of years ago and he was having vocal problems. And he said he might stop performing for a while. And I just assumed he meant from vocal problems. And if you had said to me back then, oh, he has panic attacks on stage, as much as I'm someone who has panic attacks, I was like, not Bo. He's got it all together. Like, we are just all so blind to it, like when it's other people. And but no, I don't think you will. I think if performing is something you love and it's your happy place, like, it might actually be the only place you don't run the risk of having anxiety. Maybe for Bo, he always had it on stage, you know?
Yeah. I don't know. It's been weird, and getting out into the world again and having everything start up again. It's weird. I have to get used to it.
It takes time. Yeah, we have to like train ourselves how to be back out the way we trained ourselves to stay in. You know.
Oh, I do wanted to ask about one more thing, because I'm a big fan of Marvelous Mrs Maisel, and I was so happy to see your name pop up in the credits. Could you talk about that a little bit? What you did, the consulting on that show?
Sure. Well, funny thing is, anyone who writes for television has to be part of a union called the Writers Guild. And all we are, anyone who writes on a show, we're all just writers. You know, some of us are at different pay levels. Some of us have more responsibility than others in terms of, you know, it's somebody's job to really come up with the story and write the script. Other people are in the room just to pitch jokes or help someone when they're stumped with an idea. But for some reason in the Writers Guild, each pay grade has a different name. So the reason I'm bringing this up is to just explain what I did. So if you ever watch a TV show and you're watching the end credits and it says producer, and there's 50 million producers and you're like, the hell are all these that just means writer. So in the Writers Guild, there's consultant, story editor. It has nothing to do with editing. It's just the name of the writer. Then you move up to executive story editor, then producer, then executive producer. It's literally just writer. So I will get direct messages from people that are fans and go, I saw that you story edited on Marvelous Mrs Maisel. You must be an editor. I'm like, no. Or they'll say you're a consultant and they picture me on set with a clipboard going, this is wrong. That, you know, it's just a fancy title for I sit in the writer's room. So I got hired on Marvelous Mrs Maisel they already had filmed the first episode and it was up on Amazon. And I had a meeting actually over Zoom years ago because Amy Sherman Palladino and Dan Palladino, who created the show, they also created another show called Gilmore Girls that was on American TV years ago, which was a big hit on network TV. But they were interviewing me over Zoom because they're in New York. And, you know, we just kind of hit it off. They wanted, there's not many writers on the show. There's only a few besides them. They do most of the work. But they wanted comedians in the room for the authenticity. Now, Amy Sherman Palladino's dad was a comedian. He never got very famous. He did cruise ships. She grew up around this world. I mean, she's not, you know, she wasn't, I think he was a comedian in the 60s and 70s. She knew Lenny Bruce's daughter a little bit. And so she always wanted to do a show about this world as sort of an homage to her dad. So anyway, I got hired. I would then spend about 20 weeks a year in New York working on the show. And I have to say, I'm not just being modest. I'm very mindful of this in case some Google alert comes up on my name and they see. Because honestly, it's a weird thing for them where their writers are also comedians as well. So sometimes we get asked about it, but technically, I'm not supposed to be like doing press about the show. Like that's their job, you know, but I will say, you know, I've gotten to, along with some of the other comedians in the room, contribute to the authenticity of things. Sometimes it's really nitty gritty stuff. Like, would a comedian who's just starting out get asked to do a gig in another city? And what would that look like? You know, it's stuff like that we talk out obviously a lot of it's fantasy based. So, you know, she's not a real person. Lenny Bruce didn't really hang out with this woman, but so that's kind of what it is. A lot of people will say, "Oh, I totally see your voice in that show." It's not. It's just a coincidence. My boss Amy is very similar to Midge Maisel. She is her. She channels, like Midge is channeled through Amy's writing.
Yeah.
It's what Amy would be like if Amy were stand up. I just happen to be kind of similar to Amy. We're loud, we're talkative.
Yeah.
But I really don't. There's been a misnomer that I write Midge Maisel stand up, but I don't. But I do help, as the other writers do, with any kind of aspect of the show. And that's what I love about them is they're such accomplished showrunners and producers and writers, but we get to go through the scripts and suggest, you know, not this line, how about that one? And I'm talking for any scene, whether it's a serious scene with her parents or anything. I have gotten to write a lot of jokes for the sexist male comedian characters. Those are my favorite jokes to write. It just, I don't know what it is. I might have been one in a former life. It comes through me. But I am just in love with working on that show because, like I said, with Joan Rivers' book, Enter Talking, I love that time period of comedy before it was, comedy was a big deal. There were so many comedy shows on TV, but it wasn't, there weren't comedy clubs. I love that it kind of was infused with jazz. I love New York City. I love Lenny Bruce. So, you know, writing on the show it's like getting to be behind the scenes and watch people that I really admire create something wonderful. And I'm part of it and I take my job seriously, but at the end of the day, like they could do it without me easily. And, but I'm happy to be part of it. You know, it's really my favorite. You know, you take writing jobs because in our country, that's how you get the good health insurance and the good pay through the aforementioned union. So this is actually a show I want to work on.
Are you writing on something now that you can say what it is or?
Well, I'm on Mrs. Maisel right now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I actually, like an idiot, I left the show. Season 3, I did not work on it. I left to go on tour because I'd had a tour planned already.
Yeah.
And I think I could have worked out doing both, but I was being very, that'll make me tired. I don't. So I just said, guys, it's been a great 2 years, but you know, at the end of the day, I'm a comedian. You understand, you're writing a show about a comedian. I have to quit. And then I went on tour and I went, that was dumb. I loved that show. I wanted to go back so badly, but I was afraid to ask. And then they asked me back during the pandemic last year to do some like part-time writing. And so right now they're filming season 4.
Yeah. I'm excited for that.
And so we're writing season 4 and I'm just doing a little bit of work here and there. So that's the job I have. And then, you know, my other busyness involves just putting together that anxiety podcast. It's a lot of research and I'm interviewing people. But yeah, so currently the writing job I have is Mrs. Maisel. And I have no information about when season 4 will air. I hope it airs by the end of the year, but yeah, I'm just saying people will love what's coming up for, you know, that character. She's, as always, she is trying to find her own way. She makes big mistakes. Like, it is so fun. Like, you root for her.
Yeah.
But it's so fun when she fucks up.
I know
that it's like
that.
Oh God!
I think it's the last episode of this season that she opens up for Mom's Mabley.
Yes,
which Wanda Sykes does an amazing job in that episode.
That was incredible. Yeah, yeah. And I didn't know anything about Mom's Mabley until a few years ago. Mm-hmm. Embarrassingly enough, Whoopi Goldberg did an amazing documentary about her that was on
I saw it.
TV here. Yeah, you saw it. And so, yeah, and Wanda Sykes did her. Yeah, and so Midge was opening up for a gay Black singer who's in the closet. He's supposed to be, have you heard of, oh my God, I can't remember his name.
I know he doesn't exist in real life, but he doesn't
exist in real life, but he's based on, not Nat King Cole. Oh my God, I can't remember his name. Johnny Mathis. Have you heard of him?
Yes.
I think he's based on Johnny Mathis, I think, who was in the closet. But yeah, she basically outs him on stage at the Apollo.
That's a great episode. Great season finale.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Jen, I think I'll have to let you go now because you have to start working in a couple of minutes.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope to come back to Europe. I think this time I'd love to try Germany. I'd always heard that that's a bad place to perform, but then I heard that's not true. I think it went through a phase where like audiences weren't that into comedy, but now I guess it's bigger.
Yeah, I think it's just a weird country in tastes in general. Like they just had this really real. Sometimes you hear about Germany having like some sort of fetish, or David Hasselhoff has a gigantic fan base in Germany.
I know, I love it.
God knows
so
why.
Who knows? And I'm German. I should be the David Hasselhoff of comedy. My family is German, so maybe if they find that out. But anyway,
I'm absolutely looking forward to it. This was so much fun.
Well, thank you. This was such a delight. Yeah.
Pleasure was all mine.
Ben je nog aan het kijken?
Dit was bij nog aan het kijken voor deze week. Voor de geïnteresseerden, Jen haar specials staan nog steeds op Netflix, haar boeken zijn nog steeds te verkrijgen via Amazon en haar podcast No Fun with Jen Kirkman is te vinden op alle podcastkanalen. Alle 3 seizoenen van Marvelous Mrs Maisel staan op Amazon Prime en het is een schande als je deze show nog niet bekeken hebt. Ik dank jullie voor het luisteren. Aarzel niet om iets te droppen op Facebook, Instagram of Twitter als je genoten hebt en de show wilt delen met uw volgers. Ik was Xander de Rijke, jullie horen mij volgende week weer terug en dan bingen we weer iets anders in Ben je nog aan het kijken?
Ben je nog aan het kijken?
Met Xander de Rijke.